Today we're talking about the rise and fall of two of my favorite metal magazines from back in the day, Hit Parader and Circus. Be right back. Hi, my name is Frank. Welcome back to Channel 33 RPM, your channel for vinyl, gear, and more. As a teenager in the 80s, Hit Parader and Circus, and to a lesser extent, Metal Edge, were my go-to sources for the latest rock news. Now, these publications weren't exactly known for their quality journalism, but as a kid, that fact was either lost on me or I really didn't care. Hit Parader was one of the oldest continuously published music magazines in America. The first issue rolled off the presses in 1942, and the issues kept coming for another 66 years. In the early days, Hit Parader was essentially a newspaper crammed with music lyrics, hence the name. Hit Parader referred to the hit parade, or the top songs of the day. In the 1960s, the magazine shifted its focus to rock music, bands like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and by the 1970s was regularly publishing music reviews, interviews, fan mail, and trivia. In the 1980s, Hit Parader began to focus exclusively on hard rock and metal, bands like Quiet Riot, Def Leppard, and of course Motley Crue, who seem to be on at least every second cover of that magazine. I have had an absolute blast flipping through all my old Hit Parader magazines and reading them again. It takes me right back to being a kid, and I remember back in the day I would literally read these magazines from cover to cover. One of my favorite features in Hit Parader was the information center, where it was sort of the latest rock news, but it was so dramatic. We here at the Hit Parader offices just got a phone call from a certain Mr. Nicky Six, who seemed more than a bit peeved about us referring to him as a yuppie. Hey, here's a hot one for you. It now looks certain that Kiss's Paul Stanley will be producing Poison's second album. That never happened. Whitesnake's David Coverdale wants everyone out there to know that his recent year-long bout with sinus problems had nothing to do with drugs. And who could forget Doug Hawk's Metal Method guitar lessons? I used to read this ad over and over again and drool over it, fantasizing about the day when I would have enough money to afford the Metal Method guitar lessons. In the newsstands, typically right beside Hit Parader, you could often find its chief competitor, Circus. Circus was also a monthly American magazine devoted to rock music. It began publishing in 1966 as Hullabaloo, but the name was changed to Circus 3 years later. In the late 1970s, the magazine briefly reimagined itself as a pop culture publication, but when sales started to drop, Circus returned to its rock roots. By the mid-80s, like Hit Parader, Circus focused solely on hard rock and metal bands. As a kid, I would say Hit Parader was probably my favorite out of the two, but I dug Circus quite a bit as well. It seemed more like a serious music magazine. I used to love the headlines on the front page here. AC/DC, Chewing the Fat with Angus Young, Rowdy, Road Tales, and more. Ozzy, The Complete Story from Sabbath to Sabbatical. One section I never missed in Circus was the metal guide. This was up-and-coming tour dates for bands, and I always used to pore over that to see if my hometown was ever mentioned in there, and a couple times it was. And, of course, who could forget the old Columbia House ads? That was another thing I just spent hours on, these ads, just looking through them all and circling all the titles I was hoping to get. Now, I totally forgot about this, but there was also a time when Circus tried competing with the guitar magazine. They started including tablature, or guitar music, for some of the big songs of the day. In this case, it was Extreme's Decadence Dance. One of my other favorite features in Circus was Back Pages by Lou O'Neill Jr. This was sort of a roundup of the latest rock news and rock gossip. It wasn't quite as sensational as the news in Hit Parader, but it was likely more accurate. By the time the 1990s rolled around, fortunes started to shift for Hit Parader and Circus, and, well, Axl Rose certainly didn't help matters much. On the 1991 Guns N' Roses song Get in the Ring, Axl calls out Hit Parader, Circus, Kerrang, and Spin by name. He accuses the magazines of printing lies, ripping off kids, and starting controversy, but of course he used much more colorful language. The song was written partly in response to a March 1991 cover story in Hit Parader featuring Axl Rose and Skid Row's Sebastian Bach, in which the magazine declared, "Baz and Axl interviewed together for the first time." However, it turns out Hit Parader didn't actually interview the duo. Rather, they used the transcript of an interview Axl and Sebastian had done with Howard Stern. It was bad journalism on Hit Parader's part for sure, but did most kids notice or even care? There were, however, bigger issues on the horizon. By late 1991, grunge music was capturing the hearts and minds of young people and racing up the charts. In early 1992, Nirvana's Nevermind hit #1 on the Billboard 200. At the time, it was selling a whopping 300,000 copies a week. And just like that, the so-called hair metal bands featured on the covers of Hit Parader and Circus were done, at least when it came to the pop culture of the time. While Nirvana and Pearl Jam were now selling out arenas, bands like Poison and Slaughter, and even the Blaze Bayley-fronted Iron Maiden were reduced to playing theaters and in some cases, nightclubs. So it should be no surprise that sales of the magazines started to crash and budgets were slashed. Sure, the publications changed with the times. Like I showed you, Circus started introducing guitar tablature, the magazines updated their look and started featuring grunge and alternative bands, and later nu metal, but things were never the same. Ultimately, the final blow for Hit Parader and Circus didn't come from Axl Rose or from Kurt Cobain, but rather it came from technology and the evolving habits of consumers. By the early 2000s, Hit Parader, Circus, and countless other publications were in serious trouble. Circulation and ad revenues were tanking as consumer interest in print media formats waned. Seeing the writing on the wall, Circus folded up its proverbial tent in 2006, and Hit Parader followed in 2008. And that's the end of the story. Or is it? Interestingly, Hit Parader was resurrected and reimagined in 2020 as a production studio for TV, film, live events, and more. The new Hit Parader has produced an 8-episode scripted series called Paradise City, which is currently streaming on Amazon. They're also developing other content, including the music competition shows No Cover and Roadie Rage. And Circus, well, there's a Circus website and a social media presence, but it's all pretty low-key. Today, I still occasionally get nostalgic for those days of being a kid and saving up my allowance and running to the neighborhood 7-Eleven to get my hands on the latest copies of Hit Parader and Circus. Of course, nowadays, it's much easier to get your rock news. You can just log on to Twitter or check out websites like Metal Sludge or Blabbermouth. But it just isn't the same as poring over the pages of Circus and Hit Parader. All right, 33ers, that's my walk down memory lane. Of course, there were many more metal magazines. There was Metal Edge, there was Rip, there was Kerrang, and countless others. What was your favorite metal magazine back in the day? And did you hang on to your collection? Do you have a box of old metal magazines like I do? I'd love to know. Let us know in the comments below. Otherwise, if you dug today's episode, I appreciate a quick thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what the heck are you waiting for? 33ers, I hope each and every one of you has a great week. Until next time, keep on spinning and reading.